Okay, and welcome to this second video in our series on the OCR NEA and how to approach it. In today's video, we're going to be covering assessment objective 1, which, just to remind you, is worth 50% of your total mark. Okay, so this video is imperative that we get this right. So here is the mark scheme that we use when marking your answers. I'd just like to draw your attention to column 1, so AO1, and I'll just read out the top level descriptor. So to get into level 6, so 17 to 20 out of 20, you have to have a consistent focus on the question throughout the answer. Detailed, accurate, and fully relevant knowledge and understanding is used to effectively analyze and evaluate key features of a period studied in order to produce a clear and well-supported argument which reaches a convincing and substantiated judgment. Okay, so I'm just going to just annotate some keywords on that, if this will allow me to do so. Okay, right. So first things first is that there has to be a consistent focus. If your answer starts to deviate away from the question, you will be putting yourself more in level 4 or level 3. So that's the most important thing. We then need detailed, accurate, and relevant knowledge. So your evidence needs to be really specific. So numbers, dates, statistics, key people, key terms, all that good stuff. But it needs to be relevant. Okay, so it needs to be relevant to the argument. It needs to be relevant to the question. You'd be surprised how many people decide to start talking about something which is relevant to the topic, but not relevant to the question. Okay. And then analysis and evaluation. So that's kind of what we've been teaching you to do at the end of every paragraph. You should be doing like almost like a mini conclusion at the end of every paragraph or section, basically linking back to your overall argument. And that leads me on to the last part, which is the argument should be well supported and it should be convincing and substantiated. Substantiated means it's got to be sustained throughout. So it's got to be a consistent argument throughout. It shouldn't be chopping and changing. It should be a common thread in every paragraph. Okay, so if I just come off that. Okay, right. So that's basically how to approach the AO1. I will say before we carry on with the video, don't complicate AO1. Literally, AO1 is just the bread and butter of a good essay. So if you've been getting good marks in your class essays, then that means you're probably doing AO1 like naturally without even thinking about it. All right. Essentially, it's just, can you give a piece of evidence? Can you explain that evidence and link it back to your question? And can you evaluate and give mini conclusions and support your overall argument? Okay. So as I've just broken it down there. So consistent focus, specific and relevant evidence, detailed explanations, evaluation of arguments. So that's those mini conclusions at the end where you're saying, well, overall, this fits in with my overall argument because, and so on. I'll show you some examples of that. And then finally, a sophisticated and substantiated argument threaded throughout. Okay, so first of all, let's just focus on the importance of consistency, and we're going to break down each one of these bullet points that was on this side, okay? So let's start with consistency. So your paragraphs, first of all, need to be consistently focused on the question, and then your argument needs to remain the same throughout the essay. So there's two aspects of consistency there. One is it consistently answering the question? And the other one is the argument consistent throughout the essay? Okay. So pause the video, have a little read through the two paragraphs below, and then I want you to answer which one is more focused on answering that question. So to what extent was the Holocaust a long-term plan by the Nazis? Okay, so hopefully you've paused that. And I think these paragraphs are really good examples of, well, one's a really good example of what not to do, and the other one is an example of what to do. So hopefully you realized that paragraph B was the stronger paragraph out of the two. And let's just talk through why paragraph A is quite weak. So paragraph A is a good example of a paragraph which doesn't actually address the question. So the question is saying, was the Holocaust a long-term plan by the Nazis? And instead what we have in paragraph A is a description of the Nazi invasion of Europe and then what the Holocaust is. But that's not answering the question. The question is asking, was the Holocaust a long-term plan of the Nazis? Not give me a description of what the Holocaust is. Okay, so this is a good example of where the evidence is really specific, but it's not answering the question, so it's not really relevant. So in terms of consistency, there isn't any because it's not focused on the question, so it's failing that crucial aspect. Whereas if we look straight ahead at paragraph B, you can see in literally the first line, the invasion of Russia was a turning point in Nazi policy towards Jewish people. So automatically we know that the answer is going to be thinking about Nazi policy and Jewish people. Okay, so instead of considering a policy of resettlement, blah blah blah, and then towards the bottom, where it says the main priorities of the regime change from resettlement, and then the Holocaust was a way out of a blind alley into which the National Socialists had maneuvered themselves. So what they're showing here is they're showing Nazi policies and how they changed in relation to Jewish people and how they evolved over time, which is basically what the question is asking. Because the question is asking, was it a consistent long-term plan? Their argument is kind of that it wasn't, and that it was changing and adapting over time. Okay. Right. So let me erase that. Okay, so the second part of consistency is then about ensuring consistency of argument. So if I just go back to this one was more about ensuring consistency in terms of focus on the question. And my top tips for you are that your first sentence should be containing the wording of the question or relevant synonyms. So if your question was assess the cause of the French Revolution, at the start of every section, you should be saying, you should be using the words causes of the French Revolution. So it might be like, one prominent cause of the French Revolution was the dire economic position that the French found themselves in in 1789. Okay, do you see how that's clearly using the wording of the question? And then secondly, you should be, when you're explaining the importance of your evidence, you should be linking back to the question and using the direct wording of the question. So when you are giving your evidence, so when I'm giving evidence about the financial state of France, I should then be linking back and saying, well, this helped to create the conditions for a revolution because. All right. So using the like synonyms or using the actual wording of the question when you're doing the explanation will mean that you are consistently focusing. So have a look through your essay if you've already written it, or if you're still writing it, and try and make sure that you are using the wording of the question throughout every single paragraph. Obviously, to avoid repeating yourself, you can use synonyms. So I said create the conditions for instead of cause the revolution, but it's the same idea. Okay, so second part of consistency is about consistency of argument. My top tips there on the right-hand side. So first of all, you should be giving your argument at the start of every paragraph or section, okay? You should be interweaving your argument that you've given in the intro, and you should be writing it and stating it at the start of your paragraph and sections. So it's not good enough to just say one cause of the French Revolution was the economic position. You would say, although it wasn't the most prominent cause, it was nonetheless a significant cause, and then you would consider why. Okay. Then at the end of your paragraph, you should also contain that mini conclusion that we've been talking about in lessons throughout year 12. So having an analysis or evaluation section where you kind of link back to your overall argument, and we'll have a look at this example on the left, which really does a good job of that. And then finally, you should be, when you're giving your evidence and explaining your evidence throughout, you could link back to your argument also. Okay. So I'd like to pause the video. This was in response to, this was the student model from the previous video, looking at the effects of the French Revolution on women in France. So pause the video, have a little read, and then we'll talk through kind of where the student is getting the marks and where they're potentially missing out on some marks. Okay, so hopefully you pause the video. I'd just like to draw your attention to two things. So at the start of their paragraph, they give their argument, they restate their argument. So they're basically saying, while the Enlightenment period did provide women with isolated pockets of progress, any advancements that it sparked remained ultimately futile and ineffectual, as its lack of complete extension towards women left progress remaining in a place of stagnancy at the end. Now, their argument, if you remember in the intro, was that the French Revolution only gave women some small bursts of improvements, and they basically kind of restated that there, where they talk about isolated pockets of progress. So that's really clear to me as an examiner that they've got a consistent argument there. Furthermore, at the end of their paragraph, they're ticking this part here, so where they're containing an analysis or evaluation section. Now I have cut off most of their paragraph, but at the end of section 1, we've got here, thus while the Enlightenment period did provide women with isolated pockets of progression, these moments of greater representation remained unrepresentative and therefore futile, as the majority of French women did not encounter the same circumstances. So they're taking what they've argued throughout the paragraph, and then they're linking back to their overall argument and proving the fact that the Enlightenment only leads to small amounts of progress for some women, which is basically their overall argument. So this is a really, really strong example of how you could do this. I would say that this student, there were a few areas for improvement in this section. Probably the biggest one is linking back to the argument when giving evidence. So they don't do that in this section. that I've screenshotted. There was also potentially other issues in terms of AO2 and AO3, but in terms of AO1 and kind of interweaving that argument throughout, this is a really, really strong example of that. So I would be using this as like a blueprint when you're thinking about your own answers, okay? Right. Okay, so let's move on to evidence and explanation. Let's get rid of all of this. Oh, Mr. Clelland's going to be making an appearance on the YouTube channel. Do you want to come and say hello to the viewers? Hello. Okay, so if we move on to evidence and explanation then. So a crucial part of the NEA is ensuring that in your paragraphs, your evidence is firstly relevant to your argument and the question given. And this part here, where I talk about evidence specificity, you should be including AO2 and AO3, obviously. But in terms of AO1 evidence, which is what we're focused on today, that's going to be hit by or satisfied through facts, statistics, key names, key ideas, key terms. Okay. And then your explanation needs to show how that evidence links back to the overall argument. Okay, so pause the video, have a little read through the paragraph on the right-hand side, and then we'll pick up where we left off. Okay, so hopefully you've had a little read through that paragraph. First of all, we'll just start off with bullet point 2. So evidence specificity, we can see lots of that. So we can see stuff like 70%, 700,000 peasants, trying to think of key terms where they talk about agricultural reforms, and so on. Okay, so that's firstly very, very, they've used lots of specific examples. A Kulak class as well. The second thing is ensuring that the evidence is relevant. Now, this candidate was arguing in this paragraph, if I just remind myself, yeah, so they were arguing that for Stalin to have progress the economy, the Russian economy, he needed to use terror. So one of the reasons for the terror was like an economic need, essentially. And you'll see that the evidence is very relevant to that. So throughout the paragraph, they're talking about, they're giving quotes, so we are 50 or 100 years behind the advanced countries. We need to make good this distance in 10 years. And then what's really nice about this answer as well is that they give broader context. So they do a comparison with changes in Weimar Germany and the fact that the Nazis had started their rearmament process. So the broader context was the reason for the terror. So the evidence is very relevant there to what the student's trying to do in this answer, which is basically saying it was the socio-economic environment that Stalin found himself in, which led to the terror being a necessity, okay? And then as well, towards the end of the paragraph, they did include some explanation. So they say this partly refutes the aforementioned Stalin's view. Stalin's repression was not so much a class war against the Kulak class, but a war against peasants from all classes. So that's a bit of like ensuring consistency of argument and also explaining. In terms of areas for improvement, this answer obviously did get full marks, but we could probably say that it is very evidence heavy and it could do with a bit more explanation throughout. There's also no argument given at the start of the paragraph. Okay, so that is an area for improvement, but in terms of the quality of the evidence given, in terms of the detail, that's the strength of this answer. Okay, and then we come on to the final part, which is the evaluation and weighing up of arguments and not just explaining. So it may be tempting to just list factors or reasons, but the NEA requires you to fundamentally come to evaluative conclusions about evidence. So you should be weighing up arguments and determining which is the strongest argument. So that means you will not only need to introduce your argument in the opening sentence of each paragraph, but that you'll need to develop the argument during the paragraph, and then at the end, you should be reaching a supported judgment. So let me try and make this a little bit clearer. If the question was asking you, assess the causes of the French Revolution, you would not do what you did at GCSE, where you'd say, well, one cause of the French Revolution was Louis's poor political decisions. For example, I know that he forced the Third Estate to wear drab black and to meet in separate meeting halls. Okay, that is an example of you writing a PO paragraph. We don't really want that. Okay, what we want you to do is we want you to weigh up the arguments. We want you to think about, well, was the principal cause of the French Revolution Louis's poor political mistakes? Okay, or how does it link to other ones? So it might be something like, you might talk about Louis's political mistakes, and then at the end you might say, however, Louis's political mistakes cannot be seen as the principal cause of the French Revolution, because his political mistakes cannot be seen in a vacuum. Rather, they were caused by the horrific socioeconomic position that France found itself in the late 18th century. Okay, and then you potentially try and link the socioeconomic issues to Louis' poor political mistakes. Okay. So that would be how you would do that. So it's all about weighing up rather than just explaining. So pause the video and have a little read of the paragraph on the left, and then I'll just talk through the feedback on the right. Okay, so this question was answering kind of why the Second World War broke out, essentially. Now, the paragraph explains the role that the Nazi-Soviet Pact and Hitler's invasion of Poland plays in the outbreak, but it doesn't discuss the importance of the pact. So it's not telling me how important it is, okay? So for this candidate to reach the higher levels, we need to see analysis and we need to see evaluation. So we'd want to see at the start, instead of saying an important factor in the outbreak of the Second World War, we need to see how important it is. So is it the most important? Is it a factor which is partly important, but isn't of utmost importance? And then at the end of the paragraph, we need a pretty significant section of analysis, basically detailing why we don't think that it's as significant, okay? So maybe something like, I don't know enough about the outbreak of the Second World War, but probably something like, it would be a reductive argument to argue that the outbreak of the Second World War was caused by the Nazi-Soviet Pact. This is because this neglects longer running tensions, not only between Hitler and Stalin, but across Europe as well. Okay, and then you'd have to develop that a little bit. But essentially, at the start of your paragraph and at the end of your paragraph, you should be interweaving your argument throughout. Okay, so in terms of a checklist, in terms of what you should be thinking about, have a look through your essay, ensure that you've done these 3 things in every single paragraph, and then also make sure that you've done these 2 things. Okay, that's pretty much it. Evidence, specificity, and relevance is very important, but I would expect the majority of you now at this stage in year 12 to be able to write specific evidence easily. Okay, it's the stuff in the orange boxes which is of utmost importance. Okay. Right, thank you very much for listening. I'll see you in the next video where we will be discussing AO2, and then we have the final video on AO3, and then I'll also do a video on conclusions and referencing. Thank you very much.